hold or earn rents are from holding office, if they happen to hold office. The government's choice variables are S, which will take the value of 0 or 1, that is, sign the treaty or not sign the treaty, where 1 reflects signing the treaty. And they will also select the level of repression or torture, T, which is a positive number. And we're going to assume that indeed these costs of torture to the government occur at constant marginal costs. And if you don't sign the treaty, your marginal cost of torture will be theta. But if you sign the treaty, we're going to assume, by virtue of the universal jurisdiction and the higher risk of punishment that you're going to incur, that now the marginal costs of torture are going to be k times theta, where k is a number bigger than 1. Okay? So that your costs of engaging in torture are going to be higher as a result of signing the treaty. The opposition's choice variable is going to be to select a level of effort, which we'll call E, and their effort is incurred at a constant marginal cost of B. And now, once the effort is determined and the torture levels are determined, nature intervenes to decide whether or not the government survives in office, and the probability by which the government survives in office is indeed a function of the level of the effort and the level of the torture that has been chosen by the two players. And you can see that we've got the simplest of contest success functions over there, where pi, the probability of surviving in office, is simply the ratio of the amount of torture on top divided by the sum of the efforts of the two players beneath. And now we can specify the entire utility functions for each of the players. Pi is the probability that I hold on to office, a function of the behaviors of both players. R is what I earn if I stay in office. Okay. Theta T is my total cost of engaging in torture. And it will be increased by a factor k if S is 1, that is, I do sign the agreement. And if S is 0 and I don't sign the agreement, then the k term disappears and I'm just left with theta T over here. Alright? That's on the government side. As far as the domestic opposition is concerned, they will choose an effort level E at marginal cost B. And if they happen to win office at the end of the period, they will earn the rents R that are associated with holding on to office. Have I answered your question?
I think
we're getting it. All right, let's put up the structure of the game and maybe that. All right. So what's going to happen is that we're going to assume that the government's type is going to be drawn from a random variable, drawn from a known distribution. I think we've assumed uniform in this version of the model, and this is going to be private information to the government. Government then decides, so government knows what its type is, but the opposition does not. Government then is going to decide whether or not to sign the treaty. Then the two players will simultaneously choose their efforts, T and E. Then nature will determine whether or not the government remains in office, or whether they are replaced by the domestic opposition, and the game ends. So it's a very simple one-shot game. And the result is this. The result is very simply that there is a semi-separating equilibrium in which the low-cost torturers sign the treaty and the high-cost torturers do not. And more precisely, we need some restrictions on parameter values on the K and the B, right, which are the exogenous parameters of the model. Obviously, you can't have those to be too high or too low. Then there will exist a unique semi-separating equilibrium where, for some threshold, theta tilde, all right, if the types are low, then they sign and they continue to torture. Here's the level of torture they do in equilibrium, which is a function of their type, theta. All right? And if their high theta is high, they do not sign the agreement, and they also continue to torture, which will be a function of its type as well, and of course the threshold that divides the two types. How about now?
No, this one, yeah.
Okay, so what's happening is you've got this type space. The low-cost guys are the ones that are going to sign, and the high-cost ones that don't. What's crucial is that by signing, information is conveyed to the domestic opposition that indeed you are of a high type and that the signal is understood to be that.
And they have to torture regardless as part of the...
If they don't torture, they're going to get thrown out of office. Exactly. Right. That's exactly.
Yeah.
That's exactly. Any other questions? Yeah.
Do you get similar results if this is a repeated game?
In a repeated game, I may not need the signaling to generate my reputation. So I haven't studied the signaling game properly, but what's really crucial, I mean, I think, off the top of my head, I think one could write down a repeated game in which, well, no. Okay. In a repeated game, you mean absent a treaty, or with a treaty?
With the treaty.
Well, you only get one chance to sign the treaty, right? You can pull out of the treaty, I suppose, and then re-sign, but nobody does that sort of thing. So in that sense, I don't know what a repeated game would mean.
Or you could never sign.
You can never, yeah, so you can, and certainly in our data set, well, let's come back to that when we show you what the data looks like, because that's an interesting question. Okay. Any other comments? Yes?
What about capability of the opposition to pull off a successful coup or whatever? What is the mechanism by which they would take power? Revolution, outside intervention?
The only two players here are the domestic opposition and the government, and the domestic opposition's costs of engaging in action are determined by this parameter B. So if indeed B is very low, it's very cheap for them to engage in effort, then indeed they might be able to overthrow the government. If on the other hand, it's very expensive or costly for them to do so, then their opposition may not be is unlikely to be successful. I'm thinking of domestic revolution in a sort of broad and undefined kind of way. All right.
I have one question. Do you have any other curriculum other than this equipment? Because
Yes.
we have one.
Absolutely. So for this set of parameter values, for the K and for the B, this is a unique semi-separating equilibrium. There is also a pooling equilibrium where nobody signs. Okay. And actually I'm going to talk about that when I do some comparative statics. So let me come back to that one too. Sorry to push you all off, but we'll come back to that. Any other questions at this point? All right, so what happens in equilibrium here? Well, I think you guys have got the story down. In the semi-separating equilibrium, the domestic opposition learns that the government can repress at very low cost if it sees somebody signing the treaty. If they don't sign the treaty, they know that they're a high-cost torturer. If domestic opposition is costly, which it is, because the marginal cost of engaging in effort is that term B, the domestic opposition will say, oh, wait a minute, this is a tough time. You signed the treaty. The best thing I can do is, in fact, reduce my domestic opposition. Okay? And so the domestic opposition reduces its effort, E, when it sees that the government actually signs the treaty. Given that the domestic opposition is now exerting less effort, because they know that their effort has lower marginal returns, so they're going to reduce the amount of effort they engage in. All right? Given that the domestic opposition now is exerting less effort, the government can optimally reduce its amount of torture in response to the fact that the domestic opposition has reduced its level of effort. So what will happen in equilibrium, right, is that the domestic government benefits from signing the treaty because, so the government benefits from signing the treaty because the domestic opposition is in fact going to reduce its opposition efforts. All right? And therefore the government can reduce its costly torturing. All right, and it's going to definitely benefit the most if its marginal costs of torturing to start with are very low. All right, so with reference to other equilibria, if K gets very, very large, right, remember K is the punishment associated with torturing, okay, then nobody will ever sign this thing. So there's an ancillary result. You don't want to make the punishments associated with violating the agreement too large, or nobody will ever sign the agreement in the first place.
It's the punishment or the probability of the punishment?
Expected punishment. Yeah, exactly. Alternatively, you'll get a pooling equilibrium if K is too small. If there's no expected punishment associated with the agreement, then everybody might as well go ahead and sign. Right? That's the not worth the paper it's written on. Equilibrium in which everybody should actually sign. So there are some other equilibria that are available to us in the story. Okay, what's nice about the setup is that we fully endogenized the probability of survival. Okay, that is, well, hold on, I'm jumping the gun here. Let's back up a second. We can also, what we can do is we can conduct the thought experiment. What would the country do if there was no agreement? Consider the possible counterfactual, a world in which the cat does not exist. All right. What would be the behavior of the agents within the model but in a world where there is no treaty. All right? And we can actually find quite clearly